Hello, everybody, and welcome back to In Love with AI. Here we have Bruce Clark, an incredible new guest who we want to hear everything about. Bruce, sorry, Peter. So should I call you Peter or Bruce? What's the best way of calling you?
You can call me Peter. Yeah.
Peter, I love that. I love the English accent. I lived in London for almost 2 years. I could not get the accent, but I just love listening to it. Who is Peter Bruce Clark? Tell us a little bit about yourself to begin with.
Yeah, sure. So I am an impact-focused venture capitalist. So that's my sort of day-to-day, and I do that for myself personally, as well as a venture partner at Social Impact Capital, which is a fund that I helped start in New York, as well as Conduit Connect, which is in London. And we have a particular impact-focused venture capital firm that's emerging. And so I'm on the investment committee of that. And so I spend a lot of time with mission-driven founders, but also funders. So I also do a lot of extracurricular work, kind of connecting a variety of different private investors with both funds and founders that I think are really important, sort of for the
Mhm.
future, I guess. And it just brings me a lot of joy, and I get to do that on a daily basis.
Very, very interesting. So tell us a little bit about your personal learning curve. What got you to social impact? What's your story? The part that is unscripted, that no one knows about.
Yeah, I mean, so some people might know by now some of that story, but I actually think what's quite unusual about my background is I always grew up, it was in by sort of by osmosis. I grew up in my family really thinking about social equity,
Mm,
inequity,
wow.
and the lived environment. And I think for maybe people watching this, or and particularly young people watching this, I think many of us grew up from, the late 80s to now early 2000s and now late 2000s, really grappling with some of the large existential challenges that we
Yeah.
face, but also trying to understand, well, what can I do within the framework of what we have right now? And I found it really challenging growing up to imagine where I would be in the future
Mm,
and what I could do to really have an impact as a person on a day to day in relation to kind of the trajectory of where we're headed. And you know, I think that that's what really guided a lot of my decision making
mm,
as to where I am today. I was also quite fortunate to have a lot of exposure when I was younger to different sorts of work.
yeah.
So, particularly with macro advisory businesses, where you're
Mm,
basically advising governments, hedge funds, companies about market trends, but also geopolitical trends and what we call macros. I had
yeah.
that as a sort of, background at 16, 17, which is highly
Wow.
unusual. I think to get kind of,
Yeah, we got to go back to that because I, I need to understand. How do you
I
get to
think
that?
a lot of that is saying yes to opportunities, but also
Mm,
the networks that you've got around you. I think that that's something that's often downplayed in society is, the
mm,
the people around us that
yeah.
that really matter. Um, and so I guess flash forward, I ended up academically when I graduated and university was still an attractive thing to
Yeah.
do. Arguably, it's less attractive increasingly.
Yeah.
Um, but I tend to think that actually it's a really great place to go and hone your critical thinking and kind of ideation skills. So I actually went and did something I was really passionate about, which was literature and philosophy. Um,
Nice.
and that sort of gave me a toolkit and different ways of thinking about the world that really helped anchor, okay, well, what can I do if I really
Mm,
care about these areas of the world and climate and others and, how we have shared thriving at length,
mm,
ideally, into the
yeah.
future,
Yeah.
forever, ideally.
Right.
Um, you know,
Awesome.
what can we do and what can I do? And so that gave me a really good framework of thinking about modern institutions. So
Hmm.
government, markets, philanthropy, where should I be in relation to all of that?
Mm.
And I think,
But
yeah,
it's an interesting jump from literature and philosophy to venture
it's,
capitalism.
it definitely is a big jump. And the story behind that, which is quite brief, is I had the opportunity to, when I graduated my master's, uh, go to Stanford to do research.
Mm.
And it was research in a place that's called the Global Project Center, which is internal to the Department of Engineering, of all
Mm.
places. But it's about the engineering of finance. So it's
Okay.
this blended institute, which is both kind of humanities based as well as engineering based. Obviously, I lean more heavily on the humanities side of the fence.
Yeah.
And the remit there, which was quite fortunate, was about how do you generate impact through investment vehicles.
Mm.
So I basically had sponsored research with these group called family offices, which I didn't really know what they were at the time, and they were less developed than they are now today.
Hmm.
Um, so two different family offices that were supporting research in vehicle design for both humongous impact, double, triple bottom line, as we used to talk about it,
Yeah.
plus really high financial returns. And
Well.
there, it was interesting because the focus was a lot about the lived environment. This was after the first clean tech
Hmm.
bust, so the Venrocks and
Mm.
equivalents of the world, and the kind of tide going out with those opportunities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was focused around carbon capture,
Yeah.
neutralization, and sequestration. So I was
Yeah.
basically given this remit to go out into the world in Palo Alto and San
Yeah.
Francisco. So I moved to do,
Okay.
and then suddenly, I just started talking to people and I talked to
Okay.
lots of people and I got an incredible Rolodex to go talk to people.
Okay. But that's an interesting. Do you believe that? I mean, I don't hear so many funds speak about impact the way you do.
Sure.
That is very niche, and I think for many people listening to this, probably it's totally new. But it's very relevant. I teach very young people between 20 to 26 years old, and they come with a lot of anxiety. And they have heard so many different stories of how the future is going to pan out. One of the key aspects is definitely ecology and the idea of how the world is not sustainable, and they're inheriting something that feels like very, very, very bad in a way that reduces anxiety. And now that you have a new layer of anxiety, which is the whole world of artificial intelligence just exploding, which is contributing to the impact, particularly the sustainable impact. Um, this is new, but I guess you're ahead of the curve. You've been in this space for how many years now? And I really would like to hear your view on what's going on right now, particularly in those two areas.
Yeah, for sure. So, it was quite interesting just to give you more context. When I moved, it was in the early 2010s. This was before Sam left to do OpenAI. He was still
Yeah,
in Y Combinator. This
yeah,
was pre-AlphaGo.
right.
And through the research that I actually did at Stanford, I ended up meeting people from Vicarious, DeepMind, Adia. I met Dario. I met like Demis. I met a lot of these guys who have now been building for a while and whose
Yeah,
companies have popped up in varieties of ways.
right.
Quite exciting. And actually, a lot of that research culminated in trying to launch a venture fund when I was quite young. I was probably
Yeah.
about 24, actually. So
Wow.
one of the people that you were probably teaching at the time.
Yeah.
And um, there, when I was talking to people from Vicarious and these various firms, I suddenly thought, oh, wow, impact and generating impact through an investment vehicle, it's going to be something to do with intelligence. And
Really?
actually, the first fund I tried to create with some of these partners, so we had a guy who'd spun out of one of these firms, DeepMind,
Mm.
um, was focused on high impact areas application. That was the thesis behind this.
Oh,
So it was vertical application of AI. We just
yeah.
didn't really have a very clear explanation of that. but we had really interesting relationships and deal flow. So I spent a good 2, 3 years trying to build this fund, but it was too early, which is quite
Yeah.
interesting. So what happens when you have intelligence, but a market that isn't ready for it? That's
Right.
that's the other thing I find quite
Yeah.
interesting in that story. But I
Right.
did think, a basic principle was that we have very sometimes narrow intelligence as
Yeah.
humans. And we've got very complicated, complex industries that exist where it can be really overwhelming to think about how we tackle those
Yeah.
particular areas of life, such like climate and decarbonization and things like that.
Yeah.
And so my basic thought was, well, if we applied AI in healthcare or climate or
Mm.
any of these like complex fields,
Mm.
particularly the deep sciences, maybe we would have breakthroughs or maybe we would have better decision
Yeah.
making capacity. That was the
Mm.
general belief. So we tried to fundraise. We got people like Luke Nozick from PayPal, Sean McGuire from Sequoia. We got some really amazing people to get behind us. But at
Mm.
the end of the day, we didn't have track record,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
very
Credibility,
interesting.
right? And authority.
It's a
Yeah.
big gating factor. And it is interesting now going back and looking at what we had access to and shoulda, woulda, coulda.
But it did happen. I mean, the fund now is doing impact. So eventually, you found people that are rallying behind it. So there's got to be a business case, but not only that, there's got to be something that is a higher degree of importance, I believe, because this topic is essentially moving everything at the moment. We're moving towards an energy crisis that is not only created by the fact of using these massive data centers and the impact that they have, but also because we can see because of the war the dependency that we still have on oil in other areas, and and so I think that your thesis makes total sense. Having complex systems being adjusted with artificial intelligence can possibly start, I guess at an initial step, start to figure out this huge problem of sustainability. In that same line of thought, what are the key core problems that you think we're not tackling or that require funding in order to have true impact? And then we're going to go a little bit in depth into the impact space because I'm very, very curious about your thoughts around
Yeah, I mean, so we're obviously at a really interesting time where relatively overnight intelligence has become quite cheap. And what I
that.
mean by that really is actually our analytical tools
Yeah,
around us to basically quarterback ourselves in terms of questioning our presuppositions, assumptions, and own belief systems.
yeah,
And I think that's what's so amazing by these generalist tools that we've got with like ChatGPT and Claude. Um, and obviously, I'm aware of the emissions associated, obviously, with AI, which, although bad in terms of the energy sources that we're using,
mm,
for some of those development projects
yeah,
relative to the emissions we already have going into the atmosphere, are relatively low when compared to, say, concrete, right?
yeah,
Or these massive industries that have humongous um, carbon profiles, right?
right.
Outside of that, and we can get into that, of course. What I find quite interesting and what I've seen thus far and also done through the work that I've been part of, already you see quite interesting applications of AI
Mm,
in healthcare
yeah,
specifically. If you look at Social Impact Capital's portfolio, some of our
yeah.
best investments actually were
You
in.
have some really impressive companies. I checked them out and very, very cool. Well done.
Yeah, no. So actually, there's some of our best investments really are in AI for drug discovery and development. I think there are now some companies that are using applied AI in material science and advanced materials. So you could imagine a world where we have superconductive materials, so frictionless energy would be amazing, particularly for renewables. And
Yeah.
I think now what you can do is effectively simulate um, and model real world uh, sort of tests
Mm,
at orders of magnitude faster than you would ever be able to do possibly as a human. And I'm not talking like 5 times, 10 times faster. I'm talking about sometimes 100 times faster,
Wow.
100,000 times
Yeah.
faster than human collective intelligence
Yeah.
and several PhDs, right? That makes me very optimistic,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're able in the digital, theoretical, and algorithmic world
Hmm.
to basically accelerate our epistemological horizon,
Hmm.
our field of knowledge, I think that actually makes me way more optimistic about the future than less
Hmm.
optimistic.
That was going to be my question. Are you optimistic? Do you think we're moving in the right direction as a whole, or we're not doing enough? What would be a key message if you were to inspire people to think about these core problems? What areas are opportunity areas that you see that is just not enough, or is not? Well, let you elaborate that question.
Well, I think honestly, we've got lots of intelligence at our fingertips.
Mm,
I think we increasingly have the information as to why certain structures exist and kind of the state of different sectors, problem domains, impact domains, and pretty obvious, oftentimes, answers as to why they're like that. And it's to do
mm,
with incentives and, frankly,
yeah,
humans in the loop. So,
yeah,
just to give you another example, we had one company that had taken technology out of a very different context into safety systems for
mm,
vehicles. Think hyper precision safety systems such that you could open a car door to a wall,
mhm,
and the integration of the system into the car would mean that the door would resist hitting a
mm,
wall suddenly,
mm,
right?
yeah,
Or predicting a crash in
mm,
advance. And we found this really exciting, particularly in the context of automated vehicles.
mm,
And automated vehicles have been traditionally threatening to,
yeah,
I'd say, an older generation versus a younger generation,
absolutely, yeah,
potentially more threatening from the outset to people who are now in the gig economy with driving cars
yeah,
and driving services. But when it comes to basically human safety and
mm,
societal safety, if
mhm,
you compare humans behind a steering wheel versus machines, the statistics are
yeah,
stark in
yeah,
terms of who gets hurt
yeah,
by
absolutely,
who, right?
right,
And by the way, the TLDR there is that machines are a lot safer. And if we had
yeah,
more organized and centralized driving fleets, there would be far fewer accidents, right?
yeah,
So that's amazing. But I use that as an example to
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about humans who are in the loop.
yeah,
And I think that we're at this really interesting time where if we have the humility and the patience, we are now more able than ever to question why we do things.
yeah,
And that looking in the mirror with machines is something I find really interesting.
mm,
Whether you're using Claude or ChatGPT,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
note-taking devices, or, augmenting your workflows and particularly your analytical workflows,
Mm,
contemplate why you do things. And if
yeah,
you really look carefully about why we're headed in certain directions, it comes down to really basic human principles around power, influence,
mm.
and incentives.
I heard that exact same expression yesterday and another guest in the podcast, and we were talking about human in the loop and incentives. So you're the second person to mention that. I'm going to try to see how many people talk about the same thing because I think there's something in there. But there was this. It's kind of like a problematic situation where we talk about human in the loop, but in a way we are taking jobs away from people. So we're removing the human aspect, like the example that you gave about autonomous vehicles and so on. I spent a lot of years building a company that ultimately got acquired in this space, and I remember having this conversation with a taxi driver at the point where some taxi drivers would say like, "Oh wow, I don't need to drive anymore. I can have 10 autonomous cars, and I will have 10 taxis, and it will higher income, right?" other folks would go like, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do with my life if I cannot do this? I really actually living." And so there's this situation where you realize, yes, in a way, the intelligence is giving us an opportunity to be safer, better, and so on. But at the same time, you're removing the human from it. So the aspect of human in the loop, how do we deal with that? Because I think this is inevitable, or maybe I am being negative and you're being optimistic. I don't know.
I mean, throughout time, humans exist,
Yeah,
right?
it's not going to go.
On a small time slice that we've had on the planet, if you look historically. Um, and change happens, right?
Inevitable,
Just
yeah. That's what we're
inevitable,
here.
right? If I take a step back before talking about um, the ramifications of everything, I've been thinking recently about AI as a epistemic tool
Hmm.
um, for humans. And I think of it in my own work as a kind of cognitive exoskeleton for myself. It really extends what I'm able to do in a way that I feel like I'm Sigourney Weaver in like the Aliens movie. Not really, but I do feel as though never before am I able to essentially leverage what I'm already doing in a way that is actually quite grounding and really additive to my workflow, but I don't think it will replace me.
Mm.
It actually comes down to, bizarrely as it might sound, human capacity to imagine.
Mm.
Because oftentimes in venture and with impact focused venture at the early stages, there's lots of data around what exists today, and a lot of machines are extrapolating on the back of what exists today. But the imaginative capacity of machines, that inference and intuition um, about what would plausibly happen in the future, I'm just not compelled by that argument that
Mm.
machines will ideate, particularly in a way that's so human.
Yeah.
Um, that said, I do think we're creating machines that are really anthropomorphic.
Mm.
And what I sort of mean by that, and this goes back into the sort of like literary theory slash philosophy, is, or even psychoanalytic theory, is effectively in a really reductive way, is that we build things into the world that basically reflect back ourselves.
Right.
And I do think that's really true for AI.
Mm.
Um, I think where things get really more challenging, and to your point about areas of the economy and the workflows that are disrupted, is when AI meets robotics. And if you actually
Mm.
look at advanced robotics, that's another area that's incredibly anthropomorphic as well. You know, you've got
Yeah.
like dogs and humanoids
Yeah.
and things like that, right? And there, when you look at uh, machines compared against workflows in maybe assembly lines, for instance, in terms
Mm.
of speed,
Mm.
um, you can totally imagine a world where the human in the loop is actually far less necessary and, in fact, not very economical or
Mm.
practical in
Mm.
that particular workflow. I would also say, though, a lot of those workflows are not terribly inspirational for the people doing that work.
Yeah. Correct.
I don't think that they're necessarily stable or fulfilling jobs that have trajectory.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that's something that I contemplate a little bit when
Mm.
you even go into sort of factory environments. I was actually, bizarrely, I was at a vineyard earlier in the week in Romania, of all places,
Oh, wow.
and I was watching some of the assembly line. And you think about this and you're like, is this really what we are put on Earth to do?
Right.
So you have that other, obviously that's a very like loaded question, given
Yeah.
so where we all come from
Right.
respective. You have to have those questions. And so I think, to your point, with advanced robotics, there will be a lot of disruption and job
Mm.
disruption for, I would say, like lower skill automatic or automatable work,
Mm,
which lends itself more to
mm,
robotics, I think.
mm,
And what's interesting there, but to put a slightly more positive spin versus just focusing on the workforce displacement, um, is that we have epistemic extension and suddenly we have ontological extension.
mhm,
And what I mean by that is sort of at the theory of being or the sort of the field of being, right? Suddenly, with advanced robotics, we have an extension of what we can produce,
mm,
and the rate at which we can produce those things.
mm,
And I also find that fairly um, fairly intriguing and gives me a certain sense of optimism, particularly when we're thinking about climate or
yeah,
thinking about these large existential challenges that will impact absolutely everyone in the
yeah,
long term, above
yeah,
and beyond intermediate term job
yeah,
displacement. And
yeah.
so the challenge that I've got actually as an impact investor, let's just put machines aside
Right.
a
Yeah, yeah.
second. Like we can just put that as a topic aside.
It's true. Yeah.
If we just talk about impact focused venture capital. So I'm not an
Mm,
impact investor. I'm a venture capitalist that just so happens to care about the kinds of businesses that are created.
mm,
Um, when you are looking at an investment, typically you're looking at, okay, does this business produce a good or service that is intrinsically impactful, either for society or the environment? What is the intended or
mm,
intention of the design of the business?
yeah,
What happens if it pivots? You
yeah,
have to start asking yourself,
yeah,
what are the unintended consequences? Because every action has ramifications in the
yeah.
world. There is a
Absolutely.
butterfly effect to everything in
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
And what are we willing to let go of in
yeah.
order to move forward? And I think we would love to live in a world where there is no such thing as loss. But
Wow. Yeah.
it's just that's a fantasy. It's a total
You think
fantasy.
so? Sometimes, for me, you just mentioned something that is also the second time I hear it. The world without laws is something that we're more or less trying to achieve in a way. You hear companies developing systems and medication for extending life to levels that are unheard of. Last, I spoke to a startup in Japan that is looking to develop. They're really in clinical trials to a point that they're developing these. It's not a vaccine, but it's some kind of protein that allows you to expand your life 10 years every 10 years. And they believe this is hypothetical that you can reach 250 years of life. So
Which, sure, but like fundamental physics
yeah, of course,
and
eventually.
and heat. Like
Yeah.
that's sorry, heat exists. So I get it. Sure, you can live longer, but then my question would be for what reason? And I think the longer people live, the longer people see this question of why and why should I do anything actually becomes
Yeah.
even more pertinent.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. This is a perfect segue for the second part of this podcast, which is the idea of future proofing mindset. I mean, you live in a space where people dream and build things that we haven't seen. You're essentially looking at folks that are creating the future that we don't see. So I believe that a lot of VCs are authorities in that idea of being able to help folks that don't see it yet or don't understand where can they add value to future proof themselves, because there's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of anxiety in younger generations, and there's this feeling of being trapped in a social media bubble that I am 100% would love to see it change. Exactly. So what would you like to say to younger people that eventually want to come to you for advice or want to hear what's that future that you're optimistic about, Peter?
What is the future that I'm optimistic about, or what is the advice in terms of
Okay.
what we should be doing? So my general advice to young people, is experimentation, play, and knowledge or information seeking.
Mm.
Um, and that might sound a bit surreal, but I've done a lot of that in my career, and I continue to do that a lot in my career. And it's quite interesting if I look back because um, I used to get kind of offended when I would come up with ideas and then they might be appropriated in different ways or forms. And then I found actually it's the ultimate form of flattery to
It
have
is, yeah.
people run with some of those ideas that you might have because ideas they come and go. And in
Mm.
fact, the frontier is always evolving. So,
Yeah.
brilliant thing about being human is you can always come up with new ideas as the
Yeah.
climate change. And you
Yeah.
can also always imagine something new, which is
Yeah.
phenomenal, right? And that's how
Mm.
we build actually as humans as well. So I'm far less offended when people appropriate ideas. But what I think is really important is that you really flex that capacity to imagine, to experiment, to learn, right? And you can continue to do that throughout your entire career.
Mm.
Again, outside of machine learning, if
Mm.
you look at some of the most successful people, people are like avid readers,
Mm.
avid learners. And you
Mm.
don't have to do it in that more Silicon Valley or post-Silicon Valley
Mm.
style, constantly grind, constantly
Yeah.
self-exploit yourself. I also
Yeah.
don't believe in that.
That's
But I
great to
think
hear.
this sort of like, sort of Socratic experiment with life
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
really, really valuable in ways that has compounding benefit that you're not even aware of.
Mm.
Um, and so it actually learning for learning's sake is incredibly intrinsically valuable.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so to give more practical examples of that,
Mm.
to versus sound like an armchair pundit, my general view is as tools come out, use
Mhm.
them
Yeah.
because that's what they're there for. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
again, completely different. Why did we have the loom? Why did we invent the novel?
Yeah.
Why did we have movies? In fact,
Yeah.
I don't think I would be where I am today had I not watched billions of movies growing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
even played
100%.
computer games.
Yeah.
Like the amount of strategy and tactical computer games I played growing up,
Yeah.
like probably unhealthy and slightly
Yeah.
has something to do with parenting or lack
Yeah.
of. Um, but but um, all of these cultural products are tools.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely, Peter. And to the second question, how do we future proof ourselves? What is
Mm.
that future that you think that people want to see or they need to start thinking about? Obviously, impact is a huge aspect, and that's the reason I'm asking. But
Mm.
besides the obvious,
Well, future proofing, right? Like, if again, I'll go into AI, but I'll take another step back.
Mhm.
Um, so much of life is communication and how we
Yeah,
communicate with one
yeah,
another and what are the
yeah,
vessels through which we
yeah,
communicate. We used to send people letters to do
yeah,
things, right?
true.
We used to have a telephone. We used to have something that you would like now people look at it and they're like, what the thing, right? I've
Right.
played with one myself, and at the time I thought it was a bit weird. But then we had emails, right?
Yeah,
Then we have voice notes.
yeah,
Then, the parameters and the expectations around contactability, right,
mm,
during your working day have also changed dramatically. And what becomes socially acceptable, right, in terms of how frequently we communicate. I think in this day and age, if you believe, wow, we really are going to grapple with some quite crazy existential challenges
mm,
that will be on our door soon, and actually we've started to see in the
yeah,
world.
yeah,
Um, Speed is really important. So if we can all
yeah,
agree speed is important,
mhm,
then what is our relationship with what we do,
mm,
right? So in terms of future proofing, I guess what I mean by that is if you really care about
mhm,
what it is that you do, generally you are rewarded for that passion, enthusiasm, and creativity.
mm.
Um, what are you future proofing for? So this is why I focus a lot about impact, and it's the
mm,
thing that motivates me
mm,
outside of obviously capitalism and
mm,
outside of obviously like future returns on things
mm,
that I invest in, which is obviously a big motivation. At the same
mm.
time, why should I care? You know?
Yeah.
And the why and what brings you joy and meaning is the thing that's really, really important.
Mm,
That's how I future-proof myself.
mm.
Otherwise, I'm not sure how I would have continued
I
to learn
I
everything,
100% agree with you.
you know? And so how do I future-proof myself? For an example, I'm always using new tools that
Mm,
emerge. I've been playing around with this voice to text thing to see if it
mm,
really materially impacts my workflow. And really, what I mean by that is my ability to interact with others in a
mm,
more efficient and
mm,
in a way that actually is meeting the other person as to where they are. I think
mm.
business 1.0 or 2.0 in the 90s or early 2000s is a lot of people talking past one another and not really
Yeah,
listening. Now
yeah,
that you've got note taking, um, uh, transcripts, not taking minutes, for instance, which are very unreliable,
yeah.
board minutes, for instance.
Mm.
Now we've got the ability to really potentially listen to one another,
Yeah,
right? At a
true.
speed we
That's really
never
good
had
insight. Yeah.
before,
Mm.
right? So that means hypothetically we can get more things done,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is what some of the pushback is, right? Also around AI now
Mm.
is if you look at a lot of the statistics, it's not necessarily adding to fundamental productivity, but
Mm.
it's allowing for as a baseline
Mm.
and a kind of recalibration of what it takes to do the work, whatever
Mm.
the work is, right?
Mm.
That said, it doesn't add to productivity. So
Yeah.
actually suggest you need people. You
Yeah.
need people to produce. You also
Yeah.
need consumers to consume. Right. So, you know, um, I think productivity tools are really interesting. I think understanding what your role in relation to productivity is over time. It's these sorts of questions you need to ask yourself. And
Mm.
even in the case of robotics, the thing that
Mm.
I've been thinking about from a business perspective, outside of even just like your sort of existential angst about the future, I get very angsty about where does value accrue over time
Mm.
if
Yeah.
suddenly information and intelligence is really cheap. And
Yeah.
my general belief, it's in the resistant material world.
Mm.
But then also going beyond that, if you really want to anchor in about what the future looks like and where you can have resilience, you can now Google or use Gemini, right, to basically unearth where are structurally the massive professions, industries where people are not applying or even learning those skills anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's now a dearth, there's a massive gap in like plumbers, electricians,
True.
the auxiliary jobs around advanced technologies as well, with like
Yeah.
nuclear and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
with every new technology, there's also the people that have to maintain, monitor,
Mm.
calibrate, do the business development, sales,
Mm.
support around whatever it is that you create.
Mm.
So I just think things are moving very, very quickly.
Mm.
I think that the challenge and some of the inequity is around that knowledge of how things are changing and
Yeah.
also knowledge around advancement or like deep
Yeah.
technological advancement, which is happening
Yeah.
right now. And so
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that comment just about robotics, I think some of the businesses that are going to be most attractive in the future across various verticals are going to be the ones that have this huge R&D capacity
Mm.
but are attached to the production of whatever it is,
Mm.
which vertical that they're in. And the sustainability or the longevity of that business is really going to be determined upon how fast you can update your production processes, but
Mm.
also how much, if everyone is doing that within that space, you might have to jump or leap to do something new or different
Mm.
within that business. because it becomes a
I love it.
race to the bottom, and it becomes a kind of like a commodification of what you do over time. And I think that actually poses an even greater problem for capitalism itself.
Mm. Yeah, it does. It feels almost like the model is about to change now. It feels that, I mean, you've touched upon two huge areas. First, I love the fact, and I believe this is because you have a background in philosophy, that you went back to the idea of communication. I took a few courses on philosophy, and I remember the most annoying thing was having a conversation with someone else. Because you realize some people are talking at this level and I'm talking at this level. We're not really communicating. We're saying words. No one's communicating. And that is actually a really interesting change. Because sometimes it feels that huge corporations have this almost military structure to make communication work. And without it, they would not function. And now with AI and all these tools, the whole pyramid's shrinking. And that makes almost democratic access to this ability of being able to communicate ideas. And the second part is this concept of capacity and the jump leap. I feel that we are seeing the beginning of a new economy entirely. I don't think we're going to be worrying so much about the typical jobs that you described that robotics might take on, but I truly believe we're moving towards an experience economy. The same way, YouTube and Instagram and all of these huge tools came out of internet, AI is going to leverage systems and companies that we never thought of, and they might be boring. That's the beautiful part. Like what you said, like we are looking to healthcare being now an interesting space, and areas that we construction, something that is completely abandoned, or areas that probably people were not looking into anymore because they were more excited about creating careers around the existing. Let's say businesses that the economy is comprised, but I hope and I believe it's going to expand. So, man, this is a super good conversation, Peter. Thank you so much. I think we could spend hours talking, and for sure, next time in London, I will stop by and buy you a beer if that's a possibility. Um, one last message for folks. One thing that we haven't talked about that you wanna say, or any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, so so I guess one thing I've thought about over the last, however many years that I've been doing this mission-driven finance and company creation thing, um, is what sort of impact I've had in the world so
Mm,
far. And also during this time, thinking about where value accrues, where does impact sit in all of that? And I've written about it recently in
mm,
terms of the shifts within climate tech investing
mhm,
or
mhm,
energy tech investing, or if we call it resource sovereignty or whatever words we want to use in
mm.
relation to these sorts of technologies, which are really around sustainability. But in certain political circles, we can't really talk about sustainability. We have to talk
Yeah.
about something else. And what I'm finding quite interesting is a convergence on the same object, but
Mm,
with completely different narrative frameworks to get there. So if you're much more on like the sort of libertarian camp, right side of the fence,
mm,
slight market fundamentalist, in my opinion, and
mhm,
it's okay. Um, you're talking about extreme efficiencies,
mm,
about cost, and you're talking
mm,
about route to market and
mm,
practicality.
mm,
Um, and if you look at what then underlies that as well, is you're looking at a lot of technologies that are
mm,
deeply sustainable, right?
mm,
And deeply rapid in their deployment potential.
mm,
If you're looking on the left side and you've got people who are, I call it actually a Western European
mhm,
kind of reflection on the world, and I would also
mhm,
kind of include a bunch of new English people in the States within that kind of category.
mhm,
Um, as a dominant like sort of narratorial framework, right?
mhm,
You've got a lot of people who talk about decarbonization. They talk about, that whole vernacular really around
yeah,
sustainability.
yeah,
Underlying that are
mhm,
very similar things on the other place, but the narrative emphasis is really
Insane.
different.
Yeah.
And so, even though statistics are showing, for instance, this year that there was a slight dip in climate tech investing, my challenge to that very data is, well, what about the entrepreneurs who are not self-reporting within that narratorial framework?
Right. Mhm.
So I attended a DOE showcase
Mhm.
here, about basically energy startups, material science, chemicals, that sort of thing. Very vanilla, market-based sectoral definitions of the data
Mhm.
underneath the hood, and you're like, oh, if I ran Claude over this and I asked it to
Mhm.
describe these companies within a Western European framework, what would it say?
Mhm.
Very clearly, you could basically map that into a completely different framework, and they be basically climate tech startups.
Oh wow.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
so I guess the thing is, I'm actually increasingly excited, and I think if value is increasingly at the site of the material world and
Mm.
intelligence is highly commodified, which I believe it will be very highly commodified. I think we're in
Yeah.
this crazy value bubble
Yeah.
now, which will not
Agreed.
persist. Um, that means that people find the real economy again. And what I really mean by all of this is that I think we've went through a couple of decades of really speculative meta economy
Yeah. Agree. Mm.
innovation. And now people are rediscovering the real economy and the real world.
Mm.
And that's also where you'll make money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That
that's
is superb. Absolutely. I 100% agree, Peter. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Um, One last comment. Any books you want to recommend?
I have loads of books that I want to recommend. I never recommend anything. I don't really read like management sciences, and I don't read any of like the sort of technocratic books that you're meant to read around being hyper productive. Instead, I recommend a quarterly journal that I really like. Well, it's
Hmm.
not really a journal, it's kind of like a publication. It's called Granta.
Grantor. Okay.
And Granta, basically, every quarter they take a different theme.
Hmm.
This quarter is called Scandinavia, and
Hmm.
it's a collection of fiction, non-fiction essays, art, photography, and poetry. And it's
Wow.
designed in a way that it's sort of for your attention span. So it's not linear, it's all interspersed,
Yeah.
and it's all different contemporary writers from Finland, Norway, Sweden, etc., and their
Oh.
conceptualization of the world. Before that, it was just therapy. Before that, it was India. So it's really, really
Yeah.
different. But I find it really insightful in some of the work that I do. For instance, like I've been operating a lot more in Scandinavia because of
Mhm.
some of the technologies and the companies and kind of like the ethos behind
Mhm.
the
Mm.
technologies being built. So I kind of wanted a different view
Mm.
was going on. And then if you want like a really good self-help book, which is incredibly like wooey, but if you put the woo aside and you really
Mhm.
look at what it's talking about, this is a phenomenal book that actually one of my entrepreneurs gave me
Mm.
called The Four Agreements.
The Four Agreements.
The Four Agreements.
Mhm.
And it's basically a book around about the relationship that you have with others, but also the relationship you have with yourself,
Mm.
what you can and can't give, and
Mm.
the kinds of agreements you need to make with yourself every day. So you kind of live a really like beautiful, awesome life.
Yeah.
Um, and it really is a good distillation of what I think is quite a lot of like complex thoughts in a way that's like really intuitive.
Yeah.
Um, so I've been trying to practice those agreements every day. And coming back to this idea of communication,
Mm.
It really makes you attentive to the words that you select,
Mm,
how you talk to others, and how you talk to yourself,
mm,
and also your relationship with knowledge
mm.
and what you do and don't know, and projection, what you project onto others or project onto yourself.
I love it. I'm going to read that book. Sounds extremely interesting.
So
Well, yeah. Peter, thank you so much. We've come to the end of this podcast. Where can people find you?
you can find me on LinkedIn typically. I've got a range of ways in which you can reach out to me. I always find if you're an entrepreneur and you're building something really cool, I'd suggest pretty much a really good targeted cold introduction. I don't need like a warm intro. Or if you find my social media, like good luck and happy hunting, and I find that really um yeah, and then otherwise, yeah, just online.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Peter. It's been a really wonderful conversation. Absolutely. And the invitation still stands. So next time in London, I'll ping you. And thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. Have a good day. Okay. Oh.